Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Thursday, August 25th, 2022. Clerk, if you call the roll, please.
Councilor Kent.
Here.
Councilor Giannettino.
Here.
Councilor Cuddy.
Here.
Councilor Locastro.
Here.
Mayor Quill.
Here. Would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you remain standing for a moment of silent prayer reflection. Thank you. Please be seated. Mr. Clerk, public announcements, if any.
Yep, thank you. We have a few announcements tonight. I'm going to do that now. Mayor and Council, just going to go through a list of final summer events for the next couple weeks. We do still have quite a bit of activity out in our parks and downtown. For the next couple of weeks, we kind of bought an extra week thanks to some of the previous rainouts. So we'll start with the Casey Park Pool. We're down to the final 3 days now. This Sunday, August 28th, will be the final day for the Casey Park Pool. Pool's open noon till 6 for the weekend each day. And thanks to the YMCA for their great assistance with helping us operate the Casey Park Pool. And then the final movie of the season is next week on Monday night, August 29th, will be the final outdoor movie for the summer of 2022. 8:30 p.m. at the Miles Lepic Park will be the movie Space Jam: A New Legacy. And then on Tuesday, August 30th, up at Hoops Park, will be a concert from 6 till 8:30 p.m. Mike Powell will be the next week Tuesday night concert at Hoops. And then Wednesday night, this was a great success with our new State Street Plaza. We've had music every Wednesday evening from 5:30 p.m. till 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday evenings. There's one of these left that's next week, Wednesday, August 31st, with Honky Tonk Hindus playing from 5:30 till 7:30 on the new State Street Plaza. Then next week, Thursday night, September 1st, at Marcus Street Park, will be the Miller Jazz Project. That is next week on Thursday. And then on Saturday, September 3rd, down at the Exchange Street Plaza will be the final summer Saturday market for the summer. There'll be several vendors. And the music that day is Tommy and Vinny, the jukebox duo. They've played around town a couple times this summer. They'll be down there Saturday, September 3rd on Exchange Street from 10 a.m. till noon for the final Saturday market of the season. And then skipping over Labor Day, nothing music-wise in our parks for Labor Day, but on Tuesday, September 6th, we're doing a couple of makeup concerts that week at Hoops Park. Tuesday, September 6th will be the Magical Mystery Tour. They'll be playing from 6 till 8:30 up at Hoops. That was from previous rain out this summer. And then on Wednesday, September 7th, up at Hoops Park will be Diana Jacobs Band. A couple of rescheduled concerts for the week after Labor Day due to previous rainouts, and hopefully Mother Nature cooperates. Then we have our final Music on the Mall for the summer season. It'll be Friday, September 9th, 7 till 10 p.m. down at the State Street block between Genesee and Dill Street under the Music Pavilion, and the band is Quister. That's the name of the band that night. And then on downtown, Saturday, September 10th is Tomato Fest. Back downtown this year, and they've got a whole day's worth of live music on a couple of different stages for downtown, with a concert later that evening at the Auburn Public Theater, and we'll be helping Tomato Fest over the next couple of weeks get the word out on that. So that wraps up the next couple of weeks worth of events. We do have a couple of other things. Sergeant Gilfus is in need of, the Auburn Police Department's in need of some crossing guards for the school season, both full-time crossing in their capacity as well as fill-in guards. Anybody interested can contact the Sergeant Gilfus at his phone number at the office is 315-255-4712, or his email is ggilfus@auburnny.gov. And this is a photo that was taken by Councilor Giannettino a few years ago now. And we'd like to thank Mr. Bush for being the crossing guard model in the photo that we've been using this year from a few years ago. Still looking good too.
Those kids look familiar too.
Yeah. The royalty check, 42 cents.
How many takes did you have to do for that? Just one?
And then just a final reminder that this is the last council meeting in the month of August. And we will not be meeting next week, September 1st, because council has canceled that meeting before Labor Day. But we will be meeting the following 4 Thursdays in the month of September. So no council meeting next week. That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. No presentation of proclamation. Well, public to be heard.
At this point in time, we'll open the public to be heard. Portion of the council meeting, residents are asked to state their name and address for the record. Please keep remarks to 3 minutes or less, and please observe commonly accepted rules of courtesy and decorum.
Thank you. At this time, is there anyone desiring to be heard? Only 5 people here, so somebody's got to get up. No, 4 people, one to stay up. All right, we will have our second public to be heard near the end of the meeting. Approval of the meeting minutes from August 11th of this year. Do we have a sponsor? Councilor Giannettino, second by Councilor Locastro. Correction, discussion, please call the roll.
Councilor Kent,
Yes.
Councilor Giannettino,
Aye.
Councilor Cuddy,
Present.
Councilor Locastro,
Yes.
Mayor Quill.
Aye.
Carried.
Minutes from August 18th of this year. We have a sponsor. Councilor Locastro, second by Councilor Giannettino. Discussions, corrections, please call the roll.
Councilor Kent,
Yes.
Councilor Giannettino,
Aye.
Councilor Cuddy,
Yes.
Councilor Locastro,
Yes.
Mayor Quill.
Aye.
Carried.
Thank you. City Manager's Report, Ms. Haynes, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to refer to Fire Chief Fritz's email regarding the Assistance to Firefighters grant for the purchase of new emergency portable radios. That was a successful grant application, awarded $219,122 in federal funding for the project. This amount, along with the city's 10% match, brings the project total to $241,035. This was the full amount the department requested. Once the fire department acquires the new radios and puts them in service, the radios currently assigned to AFD will be able to be released to other city departments. Just a quick update on South Street light poles. Thank you to Bill Lupian for this update. Janney Electric has received the epoxy needed to install the new anchor bolts for the remaining street light poles that are being replaced on the east side of South Street between Hamilton Ave and City Hall. Operations were planned to begin this week, and hopefully all streetlight poles should be installed within the next 2 weeks. Just a quick note, unfortunately, there are 2 brand new streetlights were installed opposite Chapman Ave. One was knocked down there, and another streetlight and tree were recently knocked down on the east side of South Street, just north of the Harriet Tubman home. Both were motor vehicle accidents, so we'll work to get those repaired. Also wanted to refer you to Bill Lupian's update email on the road program. I know that was requested last week. Did you have any questions or need any further clarification on that? Okay, great. And that is all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Speaking of the radios from the fire grant, many years ago, my hair was as dark as our police sergeant over here, and I was invited by Congressman Bowler to go to Washington and testify for that grant. There were some discussion, and I found out later about city council, it wasn't worth the time or the effort or the expense to send someone to Washington. But since that time, it passed, and we as the city of Auburn have done very well with fire services grant. And a lot of that deserved, thanks to Congressman Bowler. He was the one that really pushed it, got it done for us. I'd like to live in the past. It's more fun back there, so.
It's good to recap some history.
It's good to recap. I get the story straight too. That's a plus, so. Reports from members of council. Councilor Cuddy, please.
Yes, Mayor, thank you. Today, myself and two members from planning, Tiffany Beebe and Renee Jensen, and intern Grace, went over the applications for the ARPA funding for not-for-profits, and we're wrapping that up, and announcements will be made soon, but we're finishing up that process. I just want to let you know that it was there were 25 applications, and you know, a lot of worthwhile causes, and I'm glad that this process is coming to a close, and so that the money can go to the places, not-for-profits that need it. And you know, again, just another successful use of the ARPA COVID money for our not-for-profits, I think. So I'm glad. I just wanted to give you an update that's wrapping up.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll just add from our staff, they mentioned that Councilor Cuddy clearly had spent a ton of time reviewing the application, so we appreciate your time assisting us with that process.
It was a very rewarding process, particularly because so many deserving organizations have the need. And, you know, when council decided to divide the money, you know, that was one of the ones that I felt that was the most important, not-for-profits, how much they do for our community. And I did put a lot of time into it, but it was rewarding to know that it was going to good use, as with all the other ones. But that to me was, and that's why I volunteered to be on this particular committee. So it's my pleasure to work with the planning department as well.
We appreciate it.
Councilor, what was the amount of funding that was made available to us?
The 1.2 million.
1.2.
Yes.
All set?
All set, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Very well. Excuse me. Grant resolution number 93 of 2022, authorizing the application to the U.S. Department of Transportation for the 2022 Bridge Investment Program grant. Do we have a sponsor? Councilor Kent, second by Councilor Giannettino.
Grant Resolution 93 of 2022, whereas in June 2022, the United States Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration announced the availability of grant funding for 3 categories of bridge investment program funding opportunities. And whereas through the United States Department of Transportation, requests for applications may be submitted for consideration by municipalities who are eligible to apply. And whereas the City Manager's Office proposes to submit funding application for the replacement of the Canoga Street Bridge over the Owasco River. And whereas the proposed project is estimated to cost $6 million with a local match requirement of 20% or $1.2 million, consisting of non-federal cost share. And whereas since the City of Auburn does not currently have the funding to pay for 100% of the replacement of the Canoga Street Bridge, it is necessary to obtain DOT grant funding assistance from the 2022 Bridge Investment Program. Now therefore be it resolved by the City Council that the Mayor is authorized to submit an application to the Bridge Investment Program for the replacement of the Canoga Street Bridge. If the award of Bridge Investment Program funds, the Mayor or appointed designee is authorized to accept the grant funds and sign any and all agreements, documents, and reimbursements associated with the grant project. If awarded Bridge Investment Program funds, the City Controller is authorized to issue a municipal serial bond and create a revenue account and expenditure account. and the resolution shall take effect immediately upon its adoption.
Thank you. City manager, anything else you'd like to add in regards to this? Or?
I'll just add that if this grant is awarded, then we will be coming back to the council related to the city's share, which we would be requesting as part of a bond. So the council would be involved in making that decision prior to the project moving forward if this grant is awarded.
Do we have a rough estimate of what the city share may be at this point, or if you don't, that's fine.
So that would be $1.2 million.
Thank you. Discussion, councilors, anyone? Very well, please call the roll.
Councilor Kent,
Yes.
Councilor Giannettino,
Aye.
Councilor Cuddy,
Yes.
Councilor Locastro,
Yes.
and Mayor Quill.
Aye. Thank you. Appointment resolution number 94 of 2022, appointing a deputy city clerk. We have a sponsor. Councilor Cuddy, second by Councilor Giannettino.
Appointment Resolution 94, whereas on May 1st, 2014, the Auburn City Council appointed Suzanne Fisher of Auburn to serve as deputy clerk for the purposes of processing marriage licenses for incarcerated individuals at Auburn Correctional Facility. And whereas City Clerk's office has been notified that Ms. Fisher will no longer be serving in said position due to her retirement. And whereas on September 1st, 2022, there will exist a vacancy in the position of deputy clerk for the purposes of processing marriage licenses for incarcerated individuals at Auburn Correctional Facility. And whereas it is the recommendation of the city clerk that Brandy Crean of Auburn be appointed to fill the vacancy. Now therefore be it resolved by the council that it does hereby appoint Brandy Crean of Auburn, New York to the position of deputy clerk for the purposes of processing marriage licenses for incarcerated individuals at Auburn Correctional Facility, said appointment to take effect immediately.
Thank you. Discussion, councilors? Very well, please call the roll.
Councilor Kent,
Yes.
Councilor Giannettino,
Aye.
Councilor Cuddy,
Yes.
Councilor Locastro,
Yes.
Mayor Quill.
Aye.
Carried.
No tabled item. Next item is Olympia Terrace redevelopment. Stephanie Hutchison, Executive Director, Auburn Housing Authority. Stephanie, welcome back. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Stephanie Hutchinson, and I'm the Executive Director of the Auburn Housing Authority and CEO of our not-for-profit affiliate, AHA Development Corporation. As you know, the Housing Authority has completed the redevelopment of Brogan Manor, and we're scheduled to complete the redevelopment of the final section of Malone Village next summer. The city has entered into a payment in lieu of taxes agreement for each one of these properties in the amount of $3,000 per year. The resolutions that will be before you, I believe, September 8th, address the only public housing complex still owned by the Housing Authority. It's the 50-unit Olympia Terrace complex. These units are still part of the federal public housing portfolio and are owned entirely by the Housing Authority. Per housing law, Olympia Terrace pays property taxes based on a land value assessment of $49,800, which yields approximately $2,000 total in property taxes annually. AHA Development Corporation plans to apply to New York State this fall for funding to redevelop the entire complex. This will involve a 22-month complete gut rehab of the property, similar to that completed at Brogan Manor and Malone Village. In order to qualify for funding, we must demonstrate sustainable operating costs for the post-rehab complex and show that the city is supportive of our application for funding. Therefore, I'm requesting that the city establish a pilot agreement for the property in the amount of $3,000 per year, and that the city pass a resolution of support for our proposed project, which we will include in our application for funding. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Councilor Cuddy, please.
I would, more of a statement than a question, and I think that the success of the Brogan Manor rehab, as well as the current rehab of Malone Village, is, it's providing quality housing. and it's going to do the same for Olympia Terrace. So this makes sense, and I will be supporting this.
Thank you.
Council, please.
Thank you. How old is the Olympia Terrace complex?
Olympia Terrace was built in 1980.
Have there been any rehabs to it since then?
We've replaced kitchens and bathrooms once. We have replaced the roofs, so that won't be part of the upcoming project. We've replaced doors and siding, I believe. But other than that, nothing major. And the reason it has to be a gut rehab is because there's asbestos in the flooring. So we already have to do away with that or encapsulate it. But also, in order to meet the new energy standards that we need to meet in order to score enough points on the application to get the funding, basically the whole building shell has to be taken down and replaced.
Thank you.
Are you at full capacity over there?
No. So we currently have, we've been leasing down for about a year in anticipation of doing the construction. Our plan is so there's 50 units total. The plan is to start with 25 units and move the tenants out of those units and put them in the vacant units at the property, do those 25, move those tenants back, and then do the remaining 25. So in a perfect world, we'd have 25 vacancies by the time we start construction. Today, we have 14 vacancies at Olympia Terrace. And then we also have, just because you brought it up, we have 34 vacancies at Malone Village because of the construction we're completing now. So we are holding on to about 48 family units of affordable housing, which unfortunately can't be available right now when they're so desperately needed, but they will be available over the next 3 years.
Thank you.
And you don't see any problem with those units being filled once they're online,
No.
correct?
Stephanie, do we assist, are you all set?
All set, Mayor.
Do we assist the occupants in moving from their first apartment into the next one? How does that work?
Yep, and so occupants are, if they're just going to be in temporary housing, we offer them, I mean, we've met with all of the Olympia Terrace residents so far just to explain the process, the fact that we're applying, what could happen should we receive the funding. And then what we'll do is, if we do receive funding, we'll meet with each household, we'll give them a timeline, and then we either pay for a moving company to pack and move the household, or if the household wishes to do it on their own, we will cut a check to the household for what we would have paid the moving company. So we have to follow the Uniform Relocation Act that HUD has established. So there are many, many tenant protections.
You mentioned Malone Village, that's my old neighborhood, and it's
Yeah.
quite a transformation, really quite an improvement. It's just hard to believe from day to day how much it's changed, especially in the old 100 block, I guess, is where they're working now.
Yeah.
For the most part, so it's,
Yeah, we're very excited.
yeah, it's, you've done a terrific job, and we thank you.
Thank you.
To our city manager, will this be up for a vote? What is the process from this point? I don't mean to take away from,
So as Stephanie mentioned, we have 2 resolutions on your September 8th agenda. One will be the payment in lieu of tax agreement, approving that for $3,000 per year. And then the other is a resolution of support that Stephanie will need to include in the application for funding. So that'll be on for September 8th.
What's that?
I'll say-
Thank you.
Thank you. Preview and discussion proposed zoning amendments contained within ordinance number 2 of 2022, amending chapter 305 of the City of Auburn Code. Mr. Stephen Selvik, Deputy Director of Community Planning and Development, and Mr. Nate Garland, Assistant Corporation Counsel.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Stephen Selvik, Planning Office. here to touch base on where we're at with this process of some zoning revisions. I was before the council back in May, end of May, to do an initial presentation with some of the overall broad ideas. Since that time, I've developed a red line document that was circulated to council, I believe on the 11th, a couple weeks ago. Time's getting away from you a little bit. To start that discussion and get something out there for not only council review, but also ultimately planning board review, as well as the public at large. I wanted to take tonight to run through many of those red line changes. There's changes on, I think, 68 pages, so I don't necessarily want to hit every single one of them this evening, but I do want to capture some of the large ones before us. The council memo that I sent out this past week included a summary of those changes to kind of try to simplify what we were looking at, so that there was maybe an easier understanding of what was happening. And so I'll run through each of those sections, starting with definitions. The definitions, really, there's a couple changes for the agricultural processing plant, and then the major issues or changes are with respect to adding definitions pertinent to smoke shops. That was one of those things that has come up since that May timeframe that we are incorporating into the code at this point. Moving along to the use table, I'll make a note here that in this use table, what this really is a one location to go to for permitted uses that are contained within the body of the code itself. So I'll hit on any of the changes that exist within this table in each of the individual districts. One of the intents was to change the way that the code is set up and actually return to a bit of an easier understanding of the code as it was previously configured within the 1991 or 1992 code. Again, not looking to change the intent of the code in this update, but really to simplify. So I'll bring your attention to one particular table. As you've noticed, there's a lot of red within these tables as you go through this section. But within the central commercial corridor, central corridor district, for example, what we had was a situation where in going through it, first off, we took the parking, we added it to this section, and we repeated that parking in each and every one of these tables. Excuse me. What that has done is twofold. Is it creates a lot more potential for something being missed when you change it in different places of the code, as well as in cases where we have a non-conforming use within a district, suddenly we don't have a parking requirement for that. So the last column here, the parking, the reason why you're seeing all that crossed out is it's been moved to the off-street parking section of the code. The other portion, which I've highlighted here, really is this, when we were going through the code initially, we assigned agricultural processing plant a minimum lot size of 20,000, artist studio 6,000, a bakery 10,000, a brew pub 15,000, a garden center 30,000. Quite frankly, I can't stand up here and defend a difference in every single one of those numbers for a different use. The way that we have traditionally done it was we assign a lot size, a lot width, and setbacks based upon the zone. That's what we're looking at doing in these districts for all of these various tables, is establishing that overall use or that overall bulk requirements for the majority of the uses. In the case that there's a unique use that could easily be argued, like a temporary farmer's market that doesn't require 20,000 square foot of space, we've made some adjustments within that code, but there's a default value to go to at this point is really what it comes down to. Within each of the zoning districts, most of the zones uses stayed the same. I'll highlight a couple that have changed. So going back to the discussion of cannabis retail and cannabis on-site consumption, we've added cannabis retail to the central or general commercial district, excuse me. This was one of those two uses in the cannabis realm of things that we as a city had to define where it could be utilized. Later in the code, I'll talk a little bit more about the other cannabis uses specifically.
So that change is driven by the new state laws of legalizing
That
cannabis?
ultimately is. So we've got to be at a point that, because we did not opt out of it, we need to be at a point that we are allowing it to occur somewhere within the city. If we ignore this now and the state finally gets ahead of us and says, here's all the regulations, and someone comes and says, where do I do this? And we're like, can't do it, we don't have a spot for it. It puts us at a disadvantage, quite frankly. Similar to that, jumping to, excuse me, the highway commercial zone, page 77. You'll see within the highway commercial zone that the cannabis on-site consumption and the cannabis retail dispensary has been added to this zone specifically. Also, I'd like to note that when the zones were initially set up, the greenhouse commercial got lumped into the highway commercial zone. A commercial greenhouse by definition is a industrial scale nursery. It's different than the garden center, which we think of as the place we all go to buy plants. I don't think it was the intention to have that industrial scale within the highway commercial, because as we know, the highway commercial, Grant Ave, West Genesee, they're more consumer-oriented areas. So the intent there would be to correct that and just pull that particular use out of that one zone. Within the industrial park district, skipping ahead a few, we've clarified the two uses that are allowed within the industrial park district. This is our tech park area. The one use is light industrial and the other use is heavy commercial. We define what those are. We go on to list a variety of examples of things that could fall within those two categories. To be clear, what we've done is added cannabis processor to light industrial, which is manufacturing. And then we've added the cannabis nursery, the cultivator, and the distributor to the heavy commercial components of that. Each one of those, by the state's definition and characteristics of what they are, would fit appropriately with either the heavy commercial uses or the light industrial uses. Within the downtown zone, there is a big X through this one particular chart. At the time we were going through the code, it made sense in a utopian sense to specify what type of use could happen on each level of a building within the downtown area. You generally want your most active uses that people are in and out of the doors on your first levels. On your second levels, less activity, and as you go up, maybe residential so that there's less activity. What we have found in the end is this has created some situations where someone has an office that they want to put on the first level in a vacant building. According to this, we're going to tell them, no, they can't do that. I don't think that was ever our intent. We do want our businesses or our buildings downtown to be actively used, and we want to provide flexibility in how those buildings get used for each particular property owner. So the intent here would be to just strike this chart. The overall uses still pertain to the downtown area, but we're not going to specify what floor you have to be on to be an office or a retail shop. In section 30528 buffer areas, again, looking at the code that we had previous to this, buffers were part of the landscaping. It made sense to keep them together. One thing led to another, we pulled them apart. Really what I'm intending to do here is to move that information that's under buffers to the landscape section, which you'll see later in the code. Luckily for me, this freed up a section that I could add the cannabis uses to the code. Really what we've done right now is we've tried to take a very simple approach to this. We don't know exactly what the state regulations are, but we're in one of those positions where we want to be ready to respond. We want a place that we can respond quickly once the state regulations are fully flushed out. So right now, we're looking really at some simple general regulations, and within there, I've noted that the adult use license is required for anyone that wants to operate within the city. That's going to be a state requirement. I've also gone as far as starting to define some hours for the on-site consumption in dispensaries, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Again, any of these items that we see here, if council or the public at large feel significantly different about them, we can make those revisions, add, subtract, and go forward from there. With respect to limitations on location, you're going to see something like this quite similar to the smoke shop, proposed smoke shop information later. There's a couple items that are going to be state-driven. They're in the legislation right now with respect to not being within 500 feet of a school or 200 feet of a house of worship. I have broadened these items out a little bit, that a dispensary won't be within, and these are specific to the dispensaries and the on-site consumption. These aren't our other cannabis uses. To avoid a situation where we have a significant impact of one use all in one location, the 1,000 foot of separation helps spread the uses out. The 500 foot, I've also added nursery school, daycare, and playground to those things. Again, these are areas where children typically congregate. I've also included 300 feet from single family, two family, or townhouse residential uses, really in an effort to help minimize any impact on these areas that might neighbor or border single family homes or two family homes. After that, there's this concept of the preempted cannabis uses, and preempted cannabis uses comes from the state legislation, and it states that the nursery, the cultivator, and the processor, as well as the distributor, fall under your current zoning regulations as to where they would fit if they weren't doing it for cannabis and they were doing it for anything else. So to bring clarity to that side of it, I've noted in there that the nursery falls under the uses of commercial greenhouse and heavy commercial. The cultivator is heavy commercial and urban agriculture. The processor is light industry or light industrial. And the distributor would be heavy commercial or distribution center. These align with what the intended purpose of those uses are. Residential driveways you're going to see is scratched out at this point, and again, it wasn't that we got rid of residential driveways. That information was historically part of our off-street parking area, so we've put it back in there so that there's one location that when we're talking about parking, people know where to go to get that information and aren't trying to find it in multiple places. What we are adding to the code, as was mentioned in the May presentation, is some information on drainage and stormwater control. Really, the code as it's being presented is about codifying our current practices. So with respect to development or redevelopment that disturbs 1 acre or more, the state requires that a stormwater pollution prevention plan be developed. Essentially, we're going with the state's requirement to say, if you're doing a large disturbance, we recognize you're going to have to meet the state requirements, and that's how we're going to review it accordingly. In the case for smaller developments, less than 1 acre, that would not require state pollution prevention plan, we apply a post-development can't be any worse off than the pre-development condition. But the issue is we don't necessarily specify for what particular event. And we have said in cases of a 10-year, 25-year, 100-year. What we've done is we're looking to bring continuity to that and say it's based upon a 10-year design storm. So when an engineer comes and says, which storm am I trying to mitigate, we have something in there that points to a 10-year design storm, and we're not saying every time you have to mitigate for the worst case scenario. we have to address the everyday needs, basically. Under home occupations, within the prior code, we specifically had prohibited several home occupations that didn't necessarily work well within a residential setting. We lost that prohibition when we went over to this new code. I want to, again, this idea of bringing clarity to what we're looking at is call those particular uses back out, being an animal hospital, kennel, motor vehicle uses, auto repair shops, things of that nature, restaurants or nightclubs, and the sale of retail goods. What I've also added that cannot be a home occupation occurring within a person's residence or from a person's residence is the idea of the tobacco, the vape, or the adult use marijuana-related uses.
Mr. Salvin, is kennel defined in the code itself?
Kennel is defined within our code, and we did look up kennel, and it talks about the boarding of cats and dogs. What's not defined in that particular item is with respect to whether or not it's a commercial operation or if you're doing it out of the goodness of your heart, whether or not that's a kennel. It seems to me the take on the kennel as we're getting into it is if you're housing cats and dogs for any reason of income, that's what fits within our code right now. If it's by the goodness of your heart, then I'm not sure how we specify that quite yet. I know that's a
Do you think
topic
now's
that
the time to kind of hammer that out?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, we could add that to.
Because I think I know we limit the number of dogs a household can have. I don't think we do that for cats.
Not that I'm
Maybe
aware.
we need to define that, and then anything
Okay.
beyond that, to me, is a kennel, whether you're
Yeah.
doing it for profit or out of the goodness of your heart. And I think one of the concerns we've heard in terms of kenneling in a residential district is if these animals are roaming, and the impact that's having on neighboring properties.
No, I appreciate that, and I think I'll work with Corporation Counsel on that. I think if we set potentially, your suggestion I really like, a number of animals, and above that, we're going to define it differently than it being your personal pets. I'll work with counsel to make sure that's not going to get us in hot water somewhere.
Yes, and I've been thinking about this as well, and obviously from constituents that are concerned about animals' welfare, and also the overcrowding of animals within properties. I know there have been in the recent months nuisance properties that have had a lot of animals in there, and there's no means for code to address that. So I do think of putting a number on. Now I know that current local law has it that the council that a law can't be made regarding cats. Clerk, you had mentioned that a while back. But I would say, there's options where we could either, I know that there's some place like Lockport has maximum of cats or dogs. So the other way, and again, Corporation Counsel, if you could consider options, what the city council can do. I was thinking if the language was, and this was guided by the American ASPCA, that any more than 12 domesticated animals is excessive. And I think that number's high in and of itself. But I do want to say that there is some guidance, and I will provide the article that has that information. And again, if that seems too high for council, but I do think that now is the opportunity to address some of the concerns regarding the boarding of multiple domesticated animals that basically damages the property and can be in violation of codes relative to what it's like in other cities. And it does give, I think, the codes department, when they come upon this properties like this, where there is, the animals aren't being taken care of properly, and there's more than that can be taken care of, it gives codes an opportunity to do something based on what we pass here. So I just want to make sure that this is, and I know I'm glad that Councilor Giannettino brought this up, and you know, so if kennel can be defined one way, but also a structure that deals with boarding animals, but that is non-commercial, that could be defined too, and that, you know, and if there's something out of code there, out of the, you know, if there's an excessive number, then that is also out of code, besides being a kennel in a industrial district. That's allowed, like the ASPCA or the SPCA, but I just want to make sure that these are being addressed, and if you know, if we could see what our options are post this red line.
Yeah, certainly, and that's I appreciate the comments and the input, and the concept of boarding and a number of animals that you're boarding. So even I think we can try to work through some language on that side of it. I think the home occupation section helps start that conversation of saying, you're not going to tell me you're living in your home and I'm going to run a kennel out of my home. So we can put that one right aside and quickly get out of that. But I think a bit more in the definition, as well as clarity for number of animals and things of that nature, we can work through and come back with something as part of the final changes, for sure.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Sullivan, along the same lines, I'm in agreement with council here in regards to numbers. Should there be a mechanism as to how the overage would be removed, taken care of? What is that part of our job too, or we want to stay away from that?
I'm going to say that
I understand, you know, no one wants to get into this, but at the same time, you go to a homeowner and say, you got 27 dogs here, you're only allowed 5. Well, and they say, well, great, what do you want me to do with them? So, you know,
well,
I'm looking for some help.
One of the constituents that has been approaching council has, you know, this. I think if this is rolled out in a way, there may be a grace period for some people that are in.
Understood.
But you know, there may be some people that are resistant to this. Really, I mean, you know, I think it's, you know, given some time frame.
I'm not worried about the time frame, and please take it the way I mean it. We tell these folks, okay, you're only allowed X number of pets. So we give them 30 days, then we give them 60 days. But there's no mechanism that I'm hearing to saying within so many days, you have to do something with those pets. And say, okay, what do I do with them? I think we need to help our citizens to find a way to, I don't want to use the term dispose of these animals, but find, you know, a place for them.
Rehome.
Yeah,
Relocate.
send them to Councilor Cuddy's house, that's fine. But I think we have to look at both sides of it, limiting them and what happens when there's an overage.
I definitely appreciate that
Yes.
as well. From the zoning standpoint, I think we can look specifically at the use, and then we'll have to go that next step of figuring out how do we actually address the issue once it occurs, and how is it corrected, and what guidance can we provide? Okay.
I'm just looking for some guidance if and when it occurs.
We appreciate that, Mayor, because we sometimes spend a lot of time with, there's a violation of our code, and how do we make people, or how do we remedy that? So that's, definitely appreciate that.
Well, the code is very good at telling us what we can and can't do, but
Mhm.
what happens if we go over the line? Where do we go from here?
I mean, to me, it allows, and again, this is, you know, as for any regulation or code, you know, the problem needs to be identified first before anything happens. And I do believe that the city is, you know, good and fair about letting people know that there has been an infraction. And, you know, we can work with the individual, but first things first is like letting the individual or the household know, like, it's in violation. And the reason for these kinds of codes, but yeah, we can find a partnership through ASPCA,
Yeah.
TNR, or some, you know, some.
We're mandated to work with our citizens, our constituents. But if you tell an individual, well, you've got X number of cats here, you have to remove them. Where should I take them? You know, in my past life, my other career, we run into questions like this, like, I've got 12 dogs here, we gotta get rid of 6 of them, where do you want me to take them? You know, you want me to take them on the country road and let them go, or put them in your neighbor's yard? It doesn't have to be cast in stone, but some kind of guidance as to how you would handle it. That's all, regardless of dog, cat, rabbit, whatever.
The current, I guess our current ordinance is 3 dogs, correct? So, right, 4 in the current. So, I mean, that would stay. I don't want to, like, open up that, you know.
No, I'm not
so-
I'm looking to address the issue that's been, issues that have been brought to the council's attention. I mean, I don't think it's, and again, largely going through this whole code is not a whole scale, hey, we want to change everything around, we want to simplify and still keep the intent and purpose of what exists and fix the issues that we need to fix.
Yep.
The pet issue is a slippery slope for each and every one of us and each and every member of our community. So, you know, you're darned if you do and darned if you don't, but you want to, I want to be able to give someone guidance, say, well, you got to do this or that or the other thing. That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Sorry, Steve.
Landscape and buffers, as I mentioned, the buffers information has been moved to section 30542. So the changes that you're seeing, excuse me, on these couple pages really is just moving that information to one location. Let's see here. Off-street parking, as I mentioned, it was relocating some of the items around residential driveways, and it also is correcting a couple items. The number or letter D that you see there, establishment of parking areas shall be prohibited in downtown. That was never the intent. We totally missed in the front yard of a downtown business. So we want to correct that type of item that I should have caught the first time around 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago at this point. Additionally, this is where we have moved the parking uses too. So if you need to know how many parking spaces you need for any particular use, you go to one location. It's not contained in 7 different tables throughout the rest of the code. It's centrally located so that no matter where you are, and if you want to do a garden center, you know that you're going to need 1 for every 2,000 square feet. Jumping to, what am I skipping here? Smoke shops. Well, outdoor seating really quick. The intent behind these changes is to simplify and make outdoor seating easier to accomplish for restaurants. This was, again, written prior to this time that we went through COVID, where we were telling everyone to go eat outside. And when we were telling people to eat outside, we were giving them this arduous task of trying to make that happen. And I think we quickly found out that that wasn't needed. Put some tables outside, let people sit outside, and make it much simpler for restaurants to accomplish that.
But restaurants that serve alcohol will still have to adhere to SLA guidelines.
Yes, that doesn't change any requirements that they have with New York State for their liquor authority licensing. What it does basically more than anything is it takes away the need for them to go through a site plan review process so that we could bring it among multiple boards to see whether or not
Sure.
there was proper aisles. That's something that can be easily accomplished in-house by our code enforcement office if it's about expanding something and saying, do you have your 3 or 5 foot aisles type thing. It doesn't, we just don't want to blow it up to
So
something that's more needed.
The code previously limited it to no more than 25% of the total on-site seating may be provided outdoors. So we're removing that. So if they can fit 50% of their seating outside, they can do that.
So yeah, so if come summertime and it's a small place and maybe they've got 10 tables on the inside and they've got a large outdoor area and they can get 10 tables for outdoor dining, let them do that.
Great.
It's really going to be, the amount of outdoor dining is actually in relationship to how much space they have versus an arbitrary number that says don't move too many tables outside even though it's a beautiful day.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Off, did I already cover? Yep, I already covered off-street parking. Smoke shops. This has become an issue since the, I guess it's been identified as an issue since the May meeting. I think as an issue, it probably dates back before that. We are looking at ways that we could better define and control smoke shops within the city. What I did is I started looking around, and various places do it in different ways. I used the town of Arundequoit, which recently passed regulations regarding smoke shops, as the general basis for here. And really what the purpose states is that in keeping with New York State public health law, really we don't necessarily want smoke shops and tobacco shops to be appealing to our youth and members of our community that honestly aren't old enough to be smoking legally and things of that nature. So what we've done is we've looked at some general regulations under smoke shops, including the hours of operation being limited to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., clarifying that this is a retail sale, so it can be done in any zoning district where retail sales are allowed. But again, we are more clearly specifying that it has to be, or it can't be within 500 feet of a nursery school, daycare, playground, or other similar use where children regularly gather, 300 feet of single-family, two-family, and townhouse residential uses, 200 feet of a house of worship. The other item that you'll notice here, again, similar to the idea of the retail cannabis use, that it can't be within 1,000 feet of another smoke shop. Again, this prevents the increased density in one area and the potential detrimental effects that having too many of these type of specific retail uses in one area could create. This, looking at some other ones, can be expanded quite a bit. I mean, we can get down into every last little detail, the nuts and bolts. I think a lot of our existing code will help to, understanding how to apply elements of our existing code will help to mitigate some of the impacts. The lighting that shines outward and things like that, that's actually not permitted within our current code. So that's a function of clearly seeing how our existing code can be used to address some of those particular issues.
Yeah, I would like to, if you could send us what that code is or where it is.
Yep.
You know, the thing is, like, I don't want it to, you know, when I was a kid, the Marlboro Man was at the ballpark, right? Like, I don't want that. And it, right now, it looks like a carnival when you drive by there, and the lights are flashing. I don't even know how it complies with regulation, state regulation, right? Because you can't advertise tobacco like that. So I don't even know how they're in compliance with any state laws.
So with respect to that side of it and the flashing lights and the celebration of tobacco and pipes and whatever else, that's something that's not within this code that I had noted down here, that I think that's another regulation that we have to figure out how to specify within this code, that these lighted signs that are functionally advertising are eliminated or somehow limited within that are readily viewable from the public right of way and things of that
Right,
nature.
so I'll give you the example, local longtime business person, family store, getting a sign replaced, just replacing the existing sign, had to go through a whole process, right? And he says to me, why do I get to look at that across the street from my store, but I had to go through this entire process to just replace my sign that's been here for decades? And he's right.
And I fully agree with that. And right now, and something that, why I think we need to address this lighted signage specifically to this tobacco shop use is because the way that our code is set up right now, if you take one of those signs and you hang it 12 inches behind the glass, it's not a sign anymore from our code standpoint. Obviously, they're readily visible. They have a certain level of distraction and annoyance for anyone in the area, and I think that that does need to be fine-tuned in the final version of this proposed changes.
Okay, thank you.
Also, has lumens ever been a kind of metric to determine, appropriateness? Just so that there isn't like, is that something that can be used? Or
Within our code, we actually do have regulations that require a certain level of foot candles, the actual illumination, to be at the property line, and it's like a half a foot candle. The problem becomes twofold. A lot of times we're finding these stores are going out buying whatever lights off of Amazon and throwing up there, and they're up there, and by the time we get the complaints and try to go out there and address them, oh, they're off right now. Oh, okay, well, what happens when they come back on? So we are working through that. We do have some of those regulations that, quite honestly, we just need to get better at being able to enforce. The other issue that we do have with that is like downtown, where we say the level of lighting can only be a certain level at the property line. We have street lights up and downtown, up and down the road. So to be able to say that light level is because of that store and not the street light behind us becomes difficult. So we need to look more intently at the code in terms of glare and things of that nature, where there's an impact on human perception, basically, of something shining at you and it's causing issues because you look up, you see that, you look back, and suddenly you don't see where you're driving because of the glare that's created from that. So that'll definitely be, I think, part of this lighting and signage for
Some of them
shops.
too are using flags they're putting on the front of the building to say
Okay.
smoke shop on them too. So, I mean, maybe we can limit the number of times there's signs on one business that says smoke, right?
Yeah.
Like something as simple as that.
Yeah. So I think signage and lighting and things of that nature, we'll look at the code as a whole, but I think we'll pull items out and clearly specify them within the smoke shop regulations that we're looking at.
Are there any stipulations on a van or a box truck with advertisement on it parked in the parking lot for the business?
There are not. We've been through this a variety of times. Because it's a licensed motor vehicle that moves, we've typically not regulated them under zoning code. I'll have to look, I guess, a little further into that and see what we can and cannot accomplish on that side of it. But it's not something that someone's going to come and pull a building permit for their lettered truck or trailer or whatever it
They're
might
gonna
be.
try to
but-
do it illegally, and they can probably get just as much advertisement off
Yeah.
that, if not more,
Okay,
since it's not going on a building.
okay. So yeah, we'll look at a few of those items with respect to smoke shops specifically and try to tighten up some of those general regulations. To touch finally, I think, on the general guidelines as they relate to site plan review. We've helped to more clearly specify when major site plan review versus minor site plan review is required. And really the primary thing that we've done is looked at the design review committee's role. The design review committee is intended to be an advisory committee. The way that the code is written, it gives them an approval authority, which functionally they become kind of a quasi public body at that point. We had not intended to do that. I think the way that it got written up, it could be interpreted that way. We want to make sure that the DRC can continue to serve as this advisory role, looking at plans, looking at site plans, guiding the planning board, providing input to code enforcement and our fire inspectors and whomever else might have an issue, without suddenly becoming a public body that's holding public meetings, because that was never the intent. It is specifically a group of departments that get together and have discussions about whether or not something is compliant, and provide some guidance to the planning board. I want to touch base on one other item that was included in the zone revisions. While we were going through this process, the owner of 6 Lexington Avenue had reached out to our office about the potential of rezoning the property at 6 Lexington Avenue. So we are along Genesee Street here. This is Tops. Is this Rite Aid or Walgreens now? One or the other. Of course, across here we have our plazas. We have a highway commercial zone that runs up and down Genesee Street. We have one extension which actually was, I think, most recently Susie's Tavern, that is zoned residential. The request was to rezone that particular area to be consistent with the zoning along Genesee Street. In my review of it, looking historically at zoning maps, this site actually, part of it was zoned residentially, another portion was zoned commercially. At whatever point in time after 1988, it was all zoned residentially, although there was a commercial use on it at that time. My recommendation would be to be consistent with the zoning along that section of Genesee Street. And while we're going through this comprehensive look at our zoning code, to include this particular amendment as well. The owner is hopeful to be able to redevelop that right now. It's been vacant without much interest in it, because you have a former commercial structure in a residential district, and anytime he asks, what can I do there, we tell him nothing, which we end up with a vacant structure sitting there that's underutilized. So I think this would help bring continuity to that area, as well as ideally put that structure back into an active use.
Steve, is that the southeast corner of Lexington and Genesee?
It actually, yes, it runs from Lexington all the way to Kensington, so it's that block there. So this block, which is, or was, Susie's Tavern, is zoned residentially, and what we would do is take that parcel that fronts onto Genesee Street and include that as part of the highway commercial zone. One final note that I have that was brought up to me that will be included within the final changes before council is, in our sign area, we permit political posters, political signage during election season. The current way that reads is it refers to the election. As we all know, with early voting, the election is no longer election day. It's become a bit more convoluted. So what I would propose doing is changing the election to election day, so that we know what day we're looking at, whether it's primary election day or general election day. Everything is based upon a particular point in time. And so that'll be included in the final version of this as well. If there's other comments or questions that council has, I would be happy to answer those. The process forward, as I'm seeing it, is a public hearing before the planning board is required at their Tuesday, September 6th meeting. And ideally, council can take action on this as early as Thursday the 8th. If there's stuff that comes out of that public hearing that we can clarify, then There's ultimately the process forward, the timing on that is really at council's discretion.
I know, Mr. Salva, can you go back a couple slides? Maybe.
What was the?
I think maybe one more.
You know what the topic was?
That was it, yeah.
Okay.
So, this, I think, this section that where you're talking about, I think addresses one of the concerns that was an issue that happened recently where structure was built, and does this address some of the procedure in which the council intervenes on these issues, or is that another department that we need to?
That is ultimately contained within our historic preservation chapter. So this is separate under zoning.
Got it.
Ultimately, we are looking at changes to that chapter, and I want to say 283, because that 278?
It's 178.
178?
Yep.
No, somewhere around there. We're looking at changes to that chapter to take the council out as the arbiter ultimately. And what would happen upon changing that is, just like an issue with the zoning board or the planning board, that would go through an Article 78 proceeding and would be something that's heard by the courts instead of this board. What we have to do, because we are a certified local government under the preservation stuff with New York State, is continue to interact with them, because they are the ones that, when we made the changes to that multiple times now, they kind of look at it as the regulatory agency and say, yeah, we're good with it or we're not. I'm hopeful that they would not have any concern that an issue that arises goes through the typical process versus the unique process that we have here.
Thank you. And that was
Yeah.
that just what this part reminded me of that, and I figured it was something else, but I just wanted to make sure that it was being addressed both on the micro level and on the macro level.
I think we are currently working through that with Corp Counsel and our department, because we both have our hands in the pot, I guess.
The second component of that came up was, if somebody goes to HRRB and then goes to zoning, that it doesn't get portrayed to the homeowner, do you want to go back to HRRB? Because that's what happened here, right? They were given the option of going back to HRRB, and the homeowner said, well, no, I don't want to go back to HRRB. I think one of our concerns was making sure that process was shored up so that zoning, planning, HRRB are all on the same page if they're intermingling on a project.
And that's certainly a communication item that we are cognizant of and working through to make sure that the homeowners and or developers understand the roles of each board in their approval, and understanding how to navigate those items. So we don't send someone out there and say, hey, just go figure it out. But there are obviously times where that communication has been missed. Within the code itself, there actually is a requirement of a site plan item or a variance item. If it's within the historic district, it has to be referred to the Historic Resource Review Board so that they have the opportunity to determine if there's a impact to the historic resource. It's a process, it's a communication issue that we are determined to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
Well said, Council. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I know many discussions we've had in council over the years have been addressed or have been tried to be addressed by staff. So that's appreciated. Steve, I'm sure you don't have trouble sleeping at night after.
This is the stuff that I read. I can't read a novel.
It's a sickness.
City manager, bar graphs.
So we have a report on our first, we're through our first month of the fiscal year. You might see some spikes in the bar graphs related to encumbrances because we are all putting our blanket purchase orders in. As we spend those down, you'll see things start to equal out. So that's really the only thing that might look a little bit off in those, but we are in good shape for our first month.
Thank you. Question, council, for the city manager. Thank you. Other business from the council. Councilors, your turn. One at a time. Everyone will get the floor. All right. Our second public to be heard, Mr. Bush, please. State your name and your address for the record, please.
Dale Bush, 116 Standard Woods. This isn't so much for council, unless at some time you lose an election and you're looking for a part-time job, but I'm just here to try to reinforce what our city clerk said about the openings for crossing guards. I am a crossing guard. I've completed 14 years. I'll be starting my 15th year in a couple of weeks. It's a great part-time job. I love it. It's good for senior citizens. I'll be 75 next month. It gets you up moving. Has a lot of good perks. You know, you're working days. You're not doing any weekends, nights. You're off whenever the school is, which is quite often. The drawback is you got to put up with the weather, of course, but you know, the police department furnishes you with a nice warm winter jacket with a liner you can wear, different things, and you can make it comfortable for yourself. So I'm just more or less to the public that's listening, it's a great part-time job. So if you can apply, go ahead and do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bush.
Thank you.
Probably won't be going to Marcellus as much and waving to you in the morning now the grandson's getting older, so. Do we have a request for executive session?
Yes, Mayor, we do have one brief item that I'll defer to Corporation Counsel for the reason.
Matter is made confidential based on potential litigation.
I'd like to add one more in the same category, and maybe one the same, I'm not sure. Okay. So entertain a motion for executive session. Councilor Kent, seconded by Councilor Castro.
Motion for executive session at 6:18 PM. Councilor Kent.
Yes.
Councilor Giannettino.
Aye.
Councilor Cuddy.
Yes.
Councilor Locastro.
Yes.
And Mayor Quill.
Aye. Recess for executive session.
Yes.
There were a lot of people over there last night, Tim? No.
It was nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Manageable.
Very nice. Beautiful night.
Yeah.
Good food.
Yeah.
No dinosaur barbecue, but I never went
Yeah.
to
They
that.
got anybody in its place over there? Sitting